Pop-Up Theatre presents Behind the Dahlia, a Sherlock Holmes review, hosted by Alexandria Tan.
Welcome, listeners, to Pop-Up Theatre's Behind the Dahlia, a review of our podcast play Sherlock Holmes in the Black Dahlia. This episode is sponsored by The Social Bar and Restaurant. Today we are lucky to have an expert on the infamous Black Dahlia murder case, Mr. Steve Hodel. Now, Steve is a former LAPD detective who brings over 50 years of law enforcement, homicide, and private investigation work to this cold case. He's also a New York Times best-selling author and the son of the prime suspect of the Black Dahlia murder. Steve, welcome to our show.
Great to be with you, Alex.
And likewise, we're very honored to have you on the show, and we can't wait to hear what you have to share with us today. So first off, we have to know, what did you think of our Sherlock Holmes Black Dahlia episode? Did you enjoy it?
Very much. I was very much surprised to discover that here I thought I was the one that came along and solved it, and discover that actually Sherlock and Dr. Watson did it back in 1947 was a huge surprise to me. One of my real challenges was to separate fact from fiction, actually. Unlike most of the homicides, with LAPD, I did like 300 murder investigations during my career. And usually it was a tabula rasa, a blank slate. You just move forward and try and figure out who done it. But in this case, in the case of the Black Dahlia, Elizabeth Short, and had to separate a lot of fiction, a lot of myth that had been stacked on it for 50 years.
Yeah, but I guess it's also kind of nice to escape the ugliness of the case and see it through the eyes and the lens of fictional characters in a fictional world, but still have that very real, historically accurate element to it. So our writer and director Scott McQuaid here at Pop-Up Theatre said that when he was consulting with you and researching your father, George Hodell, as the possible killer, that he was surprised at your father's intellect because he was quite a brilliant man, right?
Right. Well, one of the big things about Dr. George Hill Hodell, he really did consider himself to be a master criminal. I mean, very much the Moriarty, if you will. And absolutely, he would have loved to engage Sherlock in a battle of wits, very confident that he would be able to outsmart one of the smartest detectives, that walks on earth. He would have loved it.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I spend the first third of my book basically defining George Hodell, my father. And he had this amazing life. I mean, it was, a boy genius, a musical prodigy at 9 years old, going to Caltech, one of the most prestigious universities in California at the age of 14, becoming a crime reporter for the newspapers at 17, passing himself off for 21, then going to pre-med at Berkeley, and just, on and on. Just an amazing individual. He had, 7, 10 different occupations by the time he was, 20. He's just unbelievable. And you need to understand that to truly understand the man and his madness, his personal madness. So, I mean, the truth is, men like George Hodell simply put things together differently than us mere mortals. And that was his madness and his sadness.
Yeah, and I think that's why Scott wrote him as this, evil mastermind in the episode. One thing that does puzzle me, though, is the letters that the LAPD received from the killer. The first letter states that the killer will turn himself in if he only serves 10 years for the crime. But then a second letter backtracks that. This makes it seem like the killer is nervous and kind of unsure of himself. It doesn't really seem to have a calculated approach that perhaps your father would have. What's your take on this?
Well, I think actually when he sent the first letter in, I think he did actually figure he'd turned himself in. And then I think he had second thoughts after a day or two and thought, what the heck? Why do that? They're not going to give me, in fact, he put it in writing and said it to him, you won't give me a square deal. I've changed my mind. And I think he basically thought, what have I got to lose by not turning myself in? And of course, he was feigning. Many of the mailings, he probably, on the Dahlia case, I think he mailed in about 6 or 8 at least that are, in my opinion, are definitely his. And they were taunting the police, catch me if you can type thing, and playing with them. Again, this cat and mouse game, the master criminal is smarter than the rookie cops. They'll never figure him out. So I think that had a lot to do with it. And he just played it out to think, well, what have I got to lose? They catch me, but I don't think they're going to. He was playing with them the entire time.
Right. Okay. So let's circle back to the beginning. How did you come to the conclusion that your father is the Black Dahlia killer?
I was long retired. I was 15 years into retirement and had become very close with my father. He'd come back to San Francisco from Asia after 40 years, and we became quite close in his last 10 years. So when he died at the age of 91, I got that 2 a.m. phone call. Went down, did all the things you have to do to take care of a father's passing, helping his wife out, June. And she brought out this album, and she showed me this album, and we're going through it. It's me as a small boy and my brothers and mother. And there was this dark-haired woman in her 20s. And I said, "Who is this?" And June said, "I don't know, somebody your father knew from a long time ago." And it looked familiar. And at the time, and I don't know to this day why Black Dahlia came to mind. I suspect it might have been, there was a movie made in 1975. It had that look of her, that 40s look. That might have been the source, but it just came and went. I didn't think much of it. Probably the next day, I was on the phone to my half-sister, Tamar, and we're talking about the great man's passing, his remarkable accomplishments, what a life he led. And she comes out of nowhere and says, "Well, he was a suspect in the Black Dahlia murder, but he didn't do it." And I said, "What the hell are you talking about, Tamar?" She said, "Yeah, the police told me that when they were taking me to and from court, that they thought he was the Black Dahlia killer." Well, my reaction was, no way. I knew Dad had problems sexually. I knew that he was, has serial marriages. He had 11 children by 5 wives.
Wow.
So I knew he was definitely into sex, but serial murders, torture murders, no way. So I started out to begin to show he had nothing to do with this. Well, I started my investigation and started looking into it. And the next thing I know, that a surgeon did it. Well, Dad was a skilled surgeon, but still, there's no way. My girlfriend was sending me up the front page headlines from the 40s. And here's one of these notes from him. And it says, "Turning myself in on January 29th, had my fun at the police, signed Black Dahlia Avenger." And I look at it, and it's my father's handwriting. I couldn't believe it. I said, "Is he pretending to be?" Anyway, that opened the door, and next thing I know, I had to relocate back to LA and in secret to the district attorney, presented my case, and he said, yes, based on this, I'd file on at least 2 of the murders, the Dahlia and another, the red lipstick murder. So I went from absolutely positive my father had nothing to do with it, and I would be able to establish that, to actually making a strong case that I would convict on.
Right, yeah. That's quite a 180 on your part then. So let's go back to the crime itself, which took place in 1947, very much the golden age of Hollywood. Your father, George Hodell, is in the heart of LA. Why do you think he killed Elizabeth Short? What's your reasoning behind the murder, and why Elizabeth?
Yeah, well, that would take a couple of hours to explain, but let's just see if I can give you a few headlines here. So initially, he met and was dating Elizabeth Short. And now this would be later proven in some secret documents that were discovered in the district attorney's office. And as far as the actual motive why he killed her, it's complicated, but he couldn't deal with rejection by anybody, especially women. And he was a classic sadist in the extreme. Because he was such a high genius, he was always ahead of his classes. And girls really didn't want, this 11-year-old or this 13-year-old, no thanks. So he built up a lot of rejection. I tried to look at a lot of the signatures as to why he became what he became. It's complicated. I'm sure there was congenital insanity on his part. I think he was the victim of incest with his mother. There's strong indications of that. And he was a misogynist. He hated women. And what we discover with Elizabeth Short is that apparently she discovered one of his crimes, a Chicago crime, the red lipstick murders. There were 3 murders in Chicago. And while he's over in China, she goes back and she starts investigating these 3 crimes. And this is all documented again in the DA reports. He's back there looking at these crimes. And apparently he must have gotten word that she was back there looking at him. He quickly resigns his position in China as a medical officer, comes back. Next thing we know, she starts running in fear of her life. And within 2 months, the murder occurs. So probably that was the main motive, was to keep her silent. And he does killings like that in other of his victims. But I think it was a combination of things: the rejection, the fear that she was going to expose him.
All right, understood. So in many ways, this ongoing investigation has been like an act 2 of your life after your career at the LAPD. So do you believe that you will be able to find some type of smoking gun evidence that will undoubtedly confirm George Hodell as the Black Dahlia killer?
Well, we have. I mean, that's what the five, that's why there are five books. It's really one ongoing investigation. And, we keep building more and more evidence. With each book, I present new evidence and stuff. And of course, some of the major evidence we already know. I mean, we learned from the secret files that he was the prime suspect all along, that he knew her, that he was a surgeon. And there's no question LAPD and coroner confirmed that there had to have been a skilled surgeon. It's actually a procedure called a hemicorpectomy. And it's the only way you can divide the body in half without sawing through bone. And he performed this on her. He also performed it on other victims. One of the Chicago little girl, he performed the same procedure, hemicorpectomy. And this was the one of the crimes that Elizabeth Short was going to reveal. So there's no question that we have actually physical evidence from in fact, I think you dealt with this in your fictionalized version. We have physical evidence of the cement sacks that were found, we have receipts for these sacks that were at the Franklin house,
Right, yeah.
that were there 3 days before the body was found, and that they were used to transport the body from an unknown location at that time, which was the Franklin house, to the crime scene. But here we have, let me give you a couple of quotes here from some of the top officers that were actually involved in the investigation. And it was a cover-up. Chief Parker, who is our most famous, LAPD's most famous chief, Bill Parker, he says, we identified the Black Dahlia suspect. He was a doctor, end quote. Chief of Detectives Thad Brown, who was involved in the investigation from the get-go. The Black Dahlia case was solved. He was a doctor who lived on Franklin Avenue in Hollywood. Lieutenant Frank Jemison of the DA's office, we know who the Black Dahlia killer was. He was a doctor, but we didn't have enough to put him away. Then we have the undersheriff saying the Black Dahlia case was solved. It'll never come out. The suspect was a doctor they all knew in Hollywood involved in abortions. So those are four of the top cops that, and this is back then, this isn't now. They're all long gone now. So we have that, and the evidence now is way beyond any reasonable doubt at this stage.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's why our writer Scott McQuaid pinned the Black Dahlia murderer as your father for our Sherlock Holmes Black Dahlia episode. And I'm sure there's some people who will and have disagreed with it, or who will say that we will never know. But of course, we wanted Sherlock to get his man in the episode. And also, when Scott was researching the whole case for the episode, it was just absolutely overwhelming what you, Steve, have found about your father in the case. Like I mentioned earlier, Sherlock is basically you, Steve, with a calabash pipe and a deerstalker hat.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Well, it is overwhelming. And I mean, you're always going to, there's a lot of people out there who say, don't mess with my myth. They don't want it solved. It's a beautiful crime as long as it remains a mystery, but you ruin it when you solve it. There's that group. And then there are these others that have their own personal attachment to certain suspects, that they don't want to give up. It's hard for a lot of people to say I was wrong or I was mistaken, so it's easier to stick with your myth and what you want to believe. But to tell you the truth, it's been a huge movement from even back in 2003 when it was a strong case to now, which is 20 years later, just keeps building and building.
So I have to ask, if your father is the Black Dahlia murderer, and you also think he's killed some other victims, as you mentioned in your book, the lipstick murderer and some other cases, but none of them are like the Black Dahlia murder, as in the way that she was cut in half and all that. So do you think your father has an MO?
There's so many moving parts to this investigation that, we haven't even touched on. For example, the taunting, there's a whole crime signature of what I call murder is a fine art. This was part of George Hodell's madness. The biggest crime signature for Elizabeth Short was the posing of her body, and this was his masterpiece. He posed her in a certain way. That whole thing is a huge part of the crime signature in the MO. You talk about Jack the Ripper. He was a ripperologist. Much of what Jack the Ripper did in his boss letter, George did. Yeah, as you know, Jack the Ripper feigned ignorance and spelling. He misspelled words. He also used red ink to write them as if it was blood. Well, George used mercurochrome on his notes to pretend it was blood. And it's just, it's just amazing. It's so convoluted in some respects. but in other respects, it's very consistent with his signatures.
Now, as this is a theater channel, I wanted to ask you about your own published play, that is A Genius Murder, a historical drama in 3 acts. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So I did write a play. I'm no playwright, but I did attempt to do a 3-act play in which basically I wanted to focus on probably the biggest misunderstanding has to do with why the cover-up. In other words, there was a major cover-up by LAPD, and people say, well, if they knew who he was, why would they cover it up? So I took 3 acts and presented this so people would better understand the why of the cover-up is really the main purpose of that.
Great, yeah. So as mentioned earlier, listeners, Steve is a best-selling author, and he has actually written numerous books on the subject of the Black Dahlia and other crimes. These works include The Black Dahlia Avenger 1, 2, and 3, Most Evil 1 and 2, and the play we were just talking about, A Genius Murder, a historical drama in 3 acts. And more recently, the book, The Mesquite, the solving of the 1938 West Texas kidnap. And due for release in 2022 is the George Hill Hodell murders, the early years. So that's something for the Black Dahlia community to look forward to. And all of Steve's books can be purchased at most online retailers, including Amazon. And of course, for easy access and to keep up with Steve, you can visit his website at stevehodel.com. Thank you, Steve, once again for coming onto our show. I would just like to say that our Sherlock Holmes Black Dahlia episode is actually one of our most popular episodes in the series. So thank you so much for all your help in aiding our research for the story.
Great to be with you, Alex. I enjoyed it.
Oh, I'm so glad. It was our pleasure to have you. Is there anything happening on your side that you would like the community to keep an eye out for?
Well, we're doing a mini-series. We're just starting it. It just got greenlit. We'll be presenting all of this, and we're going to do the 5 books. We're going to do them in I don't know how many episodes we're going to have, but got a really great team on board, and we're real excited about moving forward, and we're just starting to do this. So it's such a visual story,
Yeah.
I mean, it's really going to be, and with a top team of people, it's going to be exciting for me to do this finally after 20 years of putting it together.
Right, that's amazing. Congratulations. We're definitely gonna keep our eyes peeled for that one. So thank you again, Steve, and we look forward to you cracking the case in the near future. Just before I leave, I'd like to thank our sponsors, The Social Bar and Restaurant, a franchise here in Malaysia with exceptional food, friendly service, and an invigorating atmosphere. They are currently open for takeout and strict socially distanced dine-ins at 5 of their branches: 163 Mont Kiara, Desa Park City, Bangsar, Publica, and Empire Subang. For more information, visit their website thesocial.com.my. So if you're a listener in Malaysia, head over to The Social, where there's something for everyone. And for listeners who have not yet listened to our Sherlock Holmes in the Black Dahlia podcast play or any of the other Sherlockian adventures, you can access them at Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Anchor.fm, YouTube, and wherever else you listen to your podcasts. To stay updated, you can follow us on our Instagram at popup_theater. And for further Holmesian-related material and original theater shows, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Until next time, my fellow Sherlockians, I'm Alexandria Tan, signing off.